Risk management is at the heart of what we do. Our deep-rooted industry and technical expertise enables us to manage the unique risks your business faces.
Well, COVID-19 has had an effect on every sector, and that includes the construction industry. I'm Bronwyn Seaborn, and in this episode of the Role of Insurance series, brought to you by Santam Specialist Insurance, we dig deep into the tangled web of risks and challenges for players in the sector. Joining me for that is Russell Myers, the CEO of Mirabilis, Seamus Catterley, the CEO of Lockton South Africa, and Martin Vass from Specialist Adjusters. Gents, thanks so much for your time today. So pre-COVID, we were already having all these headlines about an industry in crisis, if we could call it that. There were announcements of business rescue left, right and centre, and then the pandemic hit. So Russell, let's start off with you right at the top. Let's put it into perspective. How much trouble is the industry in?
Well, prior to COVID, it was in fairly deep trouble, I would say. I mean, there'd been a lot of companies that were going out of business, in business rescue, etc. And then with the advent of COVID and the lockdown, the companies that were in the news were the obvious ones. But then we certainly have seen a lot of the smaller contractors, the people who you don't hear about, closing their doors, and they're gone. Whether they'll come back or not, we don't know. But certainly, the industry is very hard hit from the contractor's point of view. I won't even say what's been happening in the insurance industry in terms of it's also had a.
Well, Industry Insight says that the construction sector will shrink roughly 22% this year, with hundreds of thousands of jobs on the line. Is it that bad, Seamus?
Well, the issue is in the materials handling section of it, the supplier section of it, which is where we have quite a number of clients. We've had difficulties. Everybody's revenue is impacted directly on it. And also costs which they as businesses would normally just absorb. They've in fact attempted to put in insurance claims for those costs, those extra costs which they cover. So we're seeing it not only on the advisory side, we also see it on the claim side, where we have to deal with matters that we would not normally have to deal with. So there is definitely a restriction in the revenues available to our clients.
And Martin, from your perspective, are you seeing pretty much the same?
Very, very much the same as what Russell was saying just now. That a lot of in fact, even some of the large companies have gone into business rescue, and the smaller companies, which has caused a huge problem. And also a number of the very large projects now are slowly winding down. So whereas that was maintaining them prior to COVID, or as you said, even before COVID, there was huge problems in the industry. Now those projects such as Medupi and Kusile and those kind of big projects are slowly winding down. And there's no new, as we'll get into later in the discussion, no new projects really coming online from the government. So yes, we had a massive unemployment problem, and it's just getting worse and worse all the time. Okay,
so things were dire before. COVID making it even more so, and I think also complicating the situation quite drastically, because there have been supply chain disruptions, for example, because of the pandemic. A lot of what has to be used in construction needs to be traveled by sea. There's been all those restrictions that have come to the fore. Does that make project completion near impossible?
Well, not yet, to my knowledge. I mean, all the projects that we were on prior to COVID were delayed to some degree, but none of them are not going to be completed. And in fact, quite a few of them have been, and there doesn't seem to, but Martin or Seamus might be able to say more on that, especially Martin. I don't seem to have seen any real material delays because of unavailability of materials in our experience.
Russell, you're correct in saying that. We again, because of the limited number of projects, I mean, it is a bad sign in itself. That yes, I agree with you. They're not going to be delayed because of that, but it's just the projects are not out there. I mean, at one stage you had a kind of like a vast array of tower cranes in Johannesburg, and you look across now and there's one or two. the whole thing has changed so dramatically. No, I haven't seen any kind of slowdown because of supply.
The World Economic Forum.
Bronwyn, if I may,
yes, sure.
the one issue that I would just comment on is where clients of ours, for example, supply materials for renovation of homes, and that's really in the small building type environment. We've seen that there's been quite a lot of sales in that space, and that at a retail level, those businesses have not necessarily suffered to the same extent as the large contractors. So what it tells us is that there are a lot of these small renovation type projects underway, be it commercial or be it personal or private, but nothing, we've seen no big projects whatsoever in any sort of shape or form, be it mining, be it construction, or anything of that ilk.
No, you're right.
Okay, so we're not seeing any projects not being completed, but that's rather due to low demand, to what you're speaking to. But because of constraints to supply, surely we must be seeing costs increase ever more so.
Again, sorry, Martin, you'd probably be better.
No, Russell, far away. No, you're far away.
Russell, do you
Sorry,
want to
no,
grab
you
that
carry
one?
on. Yeah. Well, I was saying we haven't seen the cost of claims, and that's where we'd see the cost, the sort of supply constraints coming in if there were any. But we haven't seen the cost of claims increase that much over what the cost of materials was prior to COVID. So the sort of escalation in prices has been fairly predictable, or if you want to say that. So we haven't seen like a 20 or 30% increase in the cost of a claim over what it would have been compared to the cost that might have been in the bill of quantities when the project was awarded. We haven't seen any of that yet. And I don't know, Martin, perhaps you might have a...
No, you're quite right. You're quite right, Russell. We haven't. The only area we've seen a slight increase of that kind of magnitude, funny enough, is in the electrical supply, electrical switchboards, DB boards, that kind of thing. We've seen an increase in that kind of, but in the majority, no, we haven't really seen large increases. I know there's a problem with cement at one stage, but I think that has been overcome. So no, as you say, we haven't really seen it in a particular little small areas, but generally across the board, no, we haven't seen much of a big increase.
Now, the only place we've seen it...
Sorry, Russell, one of the big drivers of cost is the exchange rate.
Yeah.
And a lot of the materials that are used in large projects are in fact not imported.
Yes.
You may see some sort of pressure on materials handling, whether kit is imported or machinery is imported, renewable energy perhaps as an example. But generally in construction, where it's cement and basic commodities, all of those are produced locally.
Russell,
yes, as I said, now we've had the increases on the electrical stuff which we bring into the country. We've had that kind of price fluctuation. We've had that, and on the solar plants we've had that kind of thing as well. But generally across the board, using local product, no, we haven't really had that increase.
Russell, did you want to add in there?
Well, I was going to say what Seamus was talking about specifically regarding imported items, and I guess that's where Martin said the cost of switchboards and components that go into it, and perhaps cables if they're imported, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But that's doesn't make up the majority of the cost of a project is made up of locally sourced components, concrete, etc.
No, I really haven't seen that. But Bronwyn, just go back to where you started off. You say the kind of problems, challenges in the industry is a lot of those are similar to the challenges in the country. So kind of the construction industry doesn't stand alone. It follows the kind of the country as a whole where we have problems at the moment.
What about delivering projects on time? Because COVID has certainly seen us necessitate the need for social distancing. Curfews are now in place. You can't work at night, on projects that you want to get done. You might have increased working hours. You have to sanitize stations where people are working. Has that had any impact at all?
Again, from a project point of view, we've been obviously, as a result of the lockdown, there was a delay in completing the project, but there's been no undue delay. I haven't seen any as a result of a COVID type restrictions on the project site itself. That hasn't been not apparent yet. Maybe it's too soon, but let's see. And the only project or extensions to the period of insurance we've had have been as a direct result of lockdown, and nothing subsequent to that.
Okay,
No, just great. Yeah.
So am I reading the situation correctly that COVID-19 has impacted, but not to as large an extent perhaps as what we could have seen had demand for these projects been a lot higher?
Yes, not just demand, but had to be more projects out there. Had to be more projects prior to COVID being awarded to the various contractors. We might well have had a problem, but with such a downturn in the construction industry already, COVID has made a difference, but not a difference as we had in the industry prior to COVID. That was really our major, and it has been going down really since 2010. It's been on a long, slow decline.
But I mean, that of course doesn't mean that there still isn't a lot of risk in the system, and you need to look at those risks and you need to protect yourself, right, Russell?
Yep. Well, look, whatever projects there are out there, I'd say that, the business has become a bit riskier from a point of view of that contractors are under pressure to get work, which means perhaps that the pricing of the project comes under pressure. How do you reduce your price? Well, there's ways and means of doing it, but some of it may result in some corners being cut that not the proper risk management procedures are not observed, that you try and get work done quicker to reduce your overhead, which means that you may be not paying as much attention, and also by programs which are accelerated, which introduce additional risk. So for instance, if you're building a building and you don't ensure that the building is watertight before you start commence construction of items on the inside of the building which could be affected by rain, and you don't ensure that everything is sealed off, you start having losses as a result of perils or let's say circumstances which were not envisaged by the insured but have been put in by the contractor or the project manager to try and get the project done quicker. So there's a whole lot of things you have to...
But Russell, just coming on the other side now, I think if we see the kind of losses that the contractors have faced, and I'm just very recently, Marion Roberts gave out their results, their losses, in fact, the contractors are incurring, in fact, because some of them are so bad, they're going to business rescue. So it's not always about cutting corners. Sometimes they just have to take that loss. They might have priced very competitively, but what happens then? They take that loss at the end of the day. And we've seen it right across the board with all the contractors are making huge losses on some of these projects because they still have to adhere to the specification. They can't cut corners with the engineers. The engineers keep a very close eye on that. So unfortunately, the contractors, because it's a very, very competitive market, are taking some big losses at the moment, or have taken some big losses up to now.
Although I must say we've seen quite an increase in the number of PI-related claims, where in fact the engineers are perhaps not taking as much care as they should have, and so where it would have...
I think the professional indemnity or PI claim, professional indemnity claims, is a separate subject, and it could, we sit here for a couple of hours on PI claims. But yes, there has been an increase in PI claims, and that's for other reasons. That's because we've had a lot of engineers, a lot of families emigrating. We've had the problem about the engineers are getting older. I'm afraid they're all getting grey-haired, or they're all somewhere between 60 and 90 at the moment. So yes, there's a problem there. But that's a separate problem as far as the engineers are concerned.
Okay, well,
which leads us to the next problem. Sorry. So when the whole thing recovers, who's going to be here to build everything? As the contractors have all gone and the engineers have all gone.
Yeah, we are facing a problem with an upturn. Yes, I agree with you. A major problem. Yes.
Well, before we veer off into a separate subject completely, let's hit pause. Let's head into break. We're back right after this, so stay tuned.
33 countries, 75 innovative risk solutions, over 100 years of experience. It all adds up to being the largest general insurer in Africa.